Welcome back to Soul Ramble Mode. Future Soul, make sure to put a timestamp right in the video to make sure that people know that they could skip ahead about like 2 minutes or so to skip ahead past all the rambling and stuff like that I usually do at the beginning of every video. And for those of you that stick around, as per usual, just know that we always have an internal schedule here. We will always have our dedicated, fully edited videos on Wednesdays, and then Thursdays and Fridays are going to be Soul Ramble modes, as doing those helps upkeep consistency within the channel and stuff like that. In the same vein, if you guys could do me a favor, if you guys have been enjoying the content that I've been putting out lately, and if you so happen to enjoy this video as you're going along, if you could do me a phenomenal favor of dropping a like, maybe consider commenting, and maybe hyping up the video, and afterwards maybe subscribing, because doing those things helps out the channel immensely. The support on the channel has been immaculate these last couple of weeks, and it's just been great. I appreciate all of you guys so much, and I want to make sure to give back to you guys, which is why once we hit our 11K goal, the Winds and Waves giveaway is officially on. But it doesn't stop there. So once we hit that goal, I'll tell you guys what the potential next steps could be for that, right? So that all being said, we're just gonna go ahead and start getting into things here, right? Because this is kind of like majorly important, and I feel like we could delve a little bit more into it, right? So in my previous video, I talked about the interview, or like the video that Game Freak had put out, their secret base episode, where two major longtime directors of Pokemon were essentially talking about the fact that the entire purpose of Pokemon Champions, the entire reason that they developed Pokemon Champions the way that they did, was obviously to have our major battle simulator that could incorporate pretty much everything that they've implemented in the Pokemon so far and into the future in the style that we know it, right? But they pretty much made a very heavy emphasis on the fact that Champions was meant to essentially eternalize that battle system that they created for Pokemon all those years ago. It's made to make it so that the traditional turn-based combat that we know and love, that we grew up with, will always be accessible in Champions. And no matter what we get in newer generations, whether it be new typings, new forms, and new whatever, just whatever new content that we receive within the coming years for Pokemon, it will be implemented into the format that we know and love with turn-based combat in the competitive style, right? So that being said, they kind of hinted at the general idea that we could potentially be seeing new combat systems for future Pokemon titles, right? Possibly, as far as we know, maybe even as soon as Winds and Waves, right? Now, I talked about this in my previous video. I was saying that I don't think that we're gonna get a major, completely overhauled battle system that's completely unrecognizable like they did in Legends EA, right? The thing about Legends EA is that that is a complete experimental playground where they could do whatever they want, however they want, whenever they want. With the generational titles, with the your Scarlets and Violets and your Blacks and Whites and whatever have you, those are going to be a lot more subtle. We're going to see changes gradually as opposed to just immediate, right? They're still going to, but what I'm saying here is that they hinted at the idea that they're also going to be experimenting, utilizing the traditional titles as well. So we could be seeing some more crazier changes to the combat system in major generational titles. And there's good and bad aspects to that, some of which I didn't really have the opportunity to go into when I was recording my previous video, right? So I've made a good and bad list of things that could determine what this change could potentially mean for modern Pokemon and its new combat system, right? So first things first, as per usual, let's go over the goods that I have listed here. The first thing that I have listed here is that they will have a lot more freedom to do things they weren't able to previously because of the chains they had placed on themselves strictly developing turn-based combat for generational titles. And what I mean by that is that they couldn't really play around with more unique things, like having for example, like in Final Fantasy games or in other major RPGs and turn-based RPGs, where you could build up meters and stuff like that for very unique or special attacks. They have combo attacks for two members on the field. Maybe they can do special united attacks together, because they're usually so focused on like a smaller party and things like that, right? So when it comes to Pokemon, things were so strict that they weren't able to, have the freedom to play around with little mechanics like that, because there was a certain way that they had to do things. They weren't able to, have the fun of, in double battles, making it so that two Pokemon could attack together or anything crazy like that, because that would destroy competitive aspects. Obviously, there are ways they probably could have done something like that to make it so that, they worked in tandem with competitive aspects, but I feel like that would definitely take so much balancing work, right? The entire point, again, of Pokemon Champions is to have a mostly, continuously balanced form of competitive Pokemon in the traditional style, so that, things like that can be balanced properly over there. But going forward with, generational titles and stuff like that, and even, Legends EA titles, they're able to experiment more with little things like that and not have to worry nearly as much about balancing, because, the primary format of that is going to be it's going to be a mostly single player experience. This is going to be, a more gameplay and narrative driven single player experience, right? So with that, with the chains off, they might be able to do more ridiculous, RPG hijinks shenanigans like that. They can play around with mechanics like that now, because they're not going to be as strict with the combat system anymore. And for creative purposes, overall, I do think that it's a good thing to not have such hefty limitations, right? To an extent, I do think that it's very good to not have such heavy creative limitations, because, limiting yourself like that, it restricts you for such a long time that it will definitely kill your drive a little bit to create when you have an idea that you feel could work so incredibly well, but because of, rules and stuff like that, you're not allowed to do something like that, and you got to shove it deep down. It's got to go. It's that thought that's just got to disappear, because it would never happen. But I'm sure it's because, developers within Game Freak and stuff like that have had plenty of ideas that they've written down, that they're like, if we were to do, the combat system like we've been doing it forever, we can't do these things. So, with Pokemon Champions in mind, maybe we could start to open up a little bit more and start implementing some of these ideas, right? Because, say what you will about Game Freak, they are creative, right? They are very creative in what they do. And I know that they're not the, I know a lot of people believe that they're not like necessarily the strongest developers that we have out there, and I completely understand that, given the fact that, a lot of the games that we've released on home consoles, including their, offsets, like how do I phrase this here? Beast and Reincarnation, you know what I'm saying? Like, that release was a little bit on the messier side, you know what I'm saying? So, I know people feel a certain way about Game Freak as developers, but I do truly believe that these are very creative people, and them finally getting rid of these shackles is probably one of the most exciting things for them, because now they can really play around. Obviously, like I said in my previous video, there are more things that they need to worry about than, creative limitations, like, getting their games to work properly and functioning day one and looking as good as humanly possible with stylized graphics and things like that. But, at the very least, if the creative limitations are off, I feel like they'll definitely be a lot more incentivized to make the games look better and good, right? So I feel like, in a way, that could be a very solid and hefty bonus, right? The next proper good thing here that I wrote is that the system that they do create will inevitably be a lot more engaging, and while it may be a little off-putting for a lot of people at first, they will come to understand that newer Pokemon games can have a lot more sauce and flair to some extent as other major RPGs. So that was my entire thing with Pokemon Legends as an example, right? I guess this kind of bleeds into my next point, so I'll just kind of blend the two, right? Because what I said here was that we won't have to rely solely on Pokemon Legends for new capabilities within our Pokemon games, right? The thing about Legends is that they were able to have freedom and experiment and stuff like that. And in turn, say what you will about Pokemon Legends EA, I know it's not the highest quality game of all time like that or anything like that, but one thing I will argue back is the fact that it is the most, probably one of the most engaging Pokemon games we have ever had out of every like major mainline title, right? Legends EA offers a new style of combat system that makes it so that you're a little bit more active, you're paying attention, and you're on your toes, because you are fighting in real time. You are paying attention to everything that the opposing trainer is doing. You're paying attention to everything that the bosses are doing. You're making sure to dodge. You're making sure to, pay attention to your cooldowns. You're making sure to, power up with Mega Evolution as soon as you have the opportunity to deal more damage. You are constantly engaging much more with the game than you would be in a traditional turn-based game. Now, obviously, again, there is nothing wrong with turn-based combat. I adore turn-based combat. Some of my favorite games of all time are turn-based, they have turn-based combat systems, and that is totally fine. But of all the combat systems that we've developed over the years, we have created more engaging combat systems. It's not, necessarily a bad thing, but, more engaging combat systems is going to have the attention of your average player a lot more. So I do think that what they do create will be a blend of what we know with traditional Pokemon, but they will make things a little bit more engaging, right? I gave a couple different examples in my previous video talking about the aspect of, having something like an active time battle system, kind of like we had in Pokemon Masters or in Final Fantasy or in Final Fantasy VII or in Chrono Trigger, where you are, basing your attacks and what you do off of a meter, as opposed to just waiting for your turn to go by and waiting for their turn to go by, right? It's examples like that that showcase, there is a lot of potential in a more engaging combat system, even within the traditional turn-based combat system. They just need to be able to experiment. And I feel like the thing about Legends is that I truly do believe and hope that they found their footing with Legends EA's combat system, and they continue to improve on that, while the generational titles focus on a completely different way of going about that, right? I want to see Legends develop into its own thing, and I want to see the generational titles develop into its own thing. And we'll talk more about this as we swap over to the negatives, which we're about to do right now. And we'll get to it, right? But flipping over to the bad, the first thing that I have, or the negatives per se, first thing that I have listed here is that it would put a major nail in the coffin for a lot of people when it comes to Pokemon. This was their entryway to gaming, and that style of combat was something that they always had to look forward to. So people, like I said, me and plenty of others have grown up on traditional, regular schmegular turn-based Pokemon. That's what most people know. And the reality of it is, a lot of people don't like change to that degree, right? You could definitely tell there was a major divide when it came to, or maybe it wasn't even a divide, maybe it was more one-sided. Oh shit, that's a bug. Oh my god. I was like, what the hell is that? Hey buddy. Got him. Sorry about that, but I'm gonna keep that in because that's kind of funny. It's gonna be funny to look back on. I was talking about the ZA divide, and I was thinking maybe it wasn't even a divide, maybe it was more one-sided than I realized. I don't know. But I mean, a lot of the people that I know that played Legends ZA personally, that aren't really like in tune with like Pokemon Twitter and just general internet stuff like that, discourse around Pokemon, they loved ZA, you know what I'm saying? So, it's one of those things where I have to keep remembering that there's an entire world out there of other people that were perfectly fine with Legends ZA. Internet is, fake a lot of the time. Like, it's just a lot of numbers. But regardless of that, there was definitely a lot of people that were not about Legends EA's combat system because they felt it was way too different from what they knew and loved. And I can completely understand that. It was a drastic change. It was like, for the major Pokemon title that we were receiving in 2025, people were going to be very like, they're like, okay, but this isn't the Pokemon I know. Like, I wanted to, get into a new region, get in some new Pokemon and stuff like that. Like, we're going back to Kalos and we're in one city and we're getting Pokemon we know, but we're not even fighting traditionally. Like, there's people out there that have a much heavier preference for, turn-based combat over action RPGs and vice versa. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with having a preference like that. So, I know people hearing something like this, like even the generational titles combat system is changing. I know that that scares a lot of people. They're like, no, like this is not going to be my Pokemon. And that's really, really scary for a lot of people. And I completely understand that. I get that because that could be some hefty changes. Again, like I said, I don't think it's going to be immediate. It's going to be gradual. Like they said in the talk show or in the video in of itself, they're saying that the change will probably be very gradual throughout games. We're not going to to see in Winds and Waves that it's not turn-based at all. It's still going to be turn-based. We just don't know, to what extent, right? And then in a similar vein, we'll probably see a little bit more change in the following, whatever that still happens to be, whether it be remakes or the next Legends title or whatever's next, right? So I know a lot of people, regardless though, are gonna see that next Pokemon game. They're gonna see a change to the combat system. They're gonna be like, all right, I'm out, peace. Like, this is not Pokemon. Bring back my Pokemon, I'll come back. But this is not gonna be my Pokemon. I'm not gonna be playing it. And I understand. That's very justifiable. I completely get having that feeling. So, if you are one of those people, no shame to you. I completely get it, because that is a nail in the coffin level change for a series that's been, at least familiar for the last, 30 years. But they felt like it was time for a change. So we'll have to see what kind of change we get, right? After that, the next thing that I have listed here is that this puts a bad idea out there that traditional turn-based combat is not really as feasible anymore, and it should be moved on from, in a way, right? Now, again, like, we don't know to what extent this change is happening. I don't know why I wrote it like this, actually, but I feel like a lot of people could take this the wrong way, and, maybe even a lot of other developers going forward, and, they might see doing, like, the way they were talking about, changing and stuff like that, it almost sounded like it was a little bit of a burden to only create traditional turn-based combat the way that they've always known. And I don't think that was the case. I don't think it was. I'd like to think that it wasn't like a burden to be, shackled. Like, I'd like to think they didn't mean it was like a burden to be shackled to the turn-based combat specifically. It's just the limitations they had while working with strict turn-based combat rules, because, it always had to be, something familiar for people to justify doing that, right? So I feel like, the way that they phrased it might make it sound like, yeah, no, like, we're done with turn-based combat because, turn-based combat is a little, it's too samey, it's too, we've wanted to do too many things, and turn-based combat isn't it anymore. And I feel like a lot of people might get the idea, it's just like, yeah, like, maybe turn-based combat isn't it anymore. And it's just like, I don't want people to get the wrong idea. It's a little scary for people to get the wrong idea that turn-based combat is not a good thing. Turn-based combat is perfectly fine, it's perfectly viable, and it works in plenty of scenarios for plenty of games. Hell, there's a lot of franchises that I would love to see a turn-based game for. You know what I'm saying? Like, I would love to see a turn-based RPG for, like, Kirby or Zelda. You know what I'm saying? Obviously, I love my favorite aspect of the Mario games are the RPGs, whether it be the the Paper Mario games or the Mario and Luigi games. The RPG aspects are my favorite, right? So, or I'm sorry, I love that aspect about it, which is why, I hope people don't get the wrong idea in thinking after, we do see some major changes to the combat system. Also, I'm moving this because you are loud, buddy. That, turn-based combat is a bad thing. You know what I'm saying? I don't want people to, mix and match that improperly. So that's the other thing I have listed here. The next thing that I have listed here is that Pokemon Champions will inevitably be where we see the end of traditional turn-based combat for modern Pokemon, and everything else from now on will be experimental, right? Again, crazy phrasing, but I mean, realistically, that it's as they said. Like, if we're going based on what they told us, it sounds like, the regular schmegular, what we know, stays with Pokemon Champions. And hopefully, like, I don't know if I mentioned this, but hopefully down the line, Pokemon Champions gets a little bit more high quality, higher fidelity, more proper updates more consistently, introducing a lot of new things and stuff like that to keep things fresh and stuff like that. But, everything that we've known about Pokemon up till now apparently stops with the purpose. It was for it to, stick with Champions. And then Champions is essentially the end of that era, and going into Winds and Waves likely and beyond, we will see, more experimental stuff with both series, whether it be the sister series in Legends or the generational titles. So that's, it's very hit or miss when you think about it like that. Like, Champions, isn't like the it's not the greatest like celebration game or anything like that. I mean, we've had Showdown for so long that, you know, right now Champions just feels so inferior to that. So it's just like to think that, you know, a lot of people know of Pokemon might just be like, you know, I know that they didn't want in the interview they were saying that they don't like the idea of just skipping from generation 9 to like generation 10 or generation like 11 or going forward, you know, going into a completely brand new game, being like, yep, this is the new combat system, enjoy. If you want to go back to the old combat system, play the older games, and good luck doing that, right? They didn't want to do that. The whole purpose of Champions was to eternalize that, so everybody had an option to play, you know, traditional Pokemon the way they know it, if they wanted to, if they so choose, if they don't really feel like messing with, you know, a new modern era of Pokemon. So, you know, in a way, to dramatize it a little bit here, what we know of Pokemon dies with Champions in a way. That could be good, that could be scary, it could be a lot of different things depending on who you are. With me personally, it's scary, but it leaves me curious to see what they're going to do, like what this all means, right? But I know that that's still like very unfortunate for a lot of people, that they're just like, are you serious? Like, Champions is what I'm left with, you know? And I know that's gonna piss a lot of people off when they start to realize what, you know, what they did here. So I don't know, it's a scary thought, so we'll have to see what plays out with that. And then the last thing that I have listed here is this kind of takes away the entire point of what Pokemon Legends was doing, making it so that both generational titles and Legends titles are both going to be experimental, defeats the entire purpose of the freedom Legends exhibits. And, you know, that was my entire thing from the get-go, is that since Legends was introduced, I've been saying for years now that Legends was going to be the playground where the devs could experiment and do whatever they wanted with new combat systems and new, you know, styles of progression and things along those lines, right? Without having to worry about the usual shackles that they did have. That was the thing that I've been preaching for ages, is that, you know, we're not gonna lose what we have with traditional Pokemon. We just have Legends now to branch out a little bit more. But, you know, in a way, now they're both doing that. Now we could potentially see, again, for the generational titles, it's gonna be a lot slower, it's gonna be a lot more gradual, it's not gonna be like just whacked to the head with all the new stuff in a generational title. They're not going to do that. That's way too dangerous. It's going to be slow and it's going to be gradual, but eventually we will see a point where both of these series have experimented so far that they're probably going to be a little bit more on the unrecognizable side from what Pokemon used to be, maybe. And again, like I said for the previous point, that could be good, it could be scary, it could be a lot of things. We don't know what to expect with this yet. So that's one of those things where it's just like, you know, it kind of sucks that, you know, Legends was going to be what that was. Like, that's why I was always looking so forward to Legends titles. Now, again, to an extent, Legends titles are still going to be free to do their own thing. They're going to freely be able to revisit regions, whether it be in the past, whether it be in the future. They're going to be able to, you know, get a lot more hefty with the changes, like the battle system, with progression systems and things like that. They can play around with that with no bars. Like, they can jump over the railing and just free fall with anything that they want over there. Generational titles are going to be a lot slower. They're going to implement little things here and there, see what we like, see what works, see what doesn't work, and by the next major title, we'll see that maybe implemented in another Legends game to a much crazier degree, or we'll see it implemented into the next like remake or generational title, you know, maybe a little bit more fleshed out if they saw that worked, right? So, you know, they're still going to be sister series, but now they're both experimental series probably going forward. One definitely a little bit more than the other. So in a way, it is a little sad to think about it like that, because I really did like the concept of Legends being like that experimental thing, that free faller, that free baller. But I guess we free balling, we underwear off free balling everywhere, you know what I'm saying? So we are just gonna have to see what kind of change this all brings. But with all of that being said, that just about wraps up all of the positives and negatives I have with potentially getting rid, or with changing the combat system in modern Pokemon. So we'll have to see what plays out with everything here. Hopefully what they do bring, if it is subtle, hopefully it's something solid, hopefully it's something fun, and something that we could see getting proper development in future titles not too long from now, right? So I'm gonna leave it at that. I've yapped enough. I'm passing the mic over to you guys, and I want you guys to tell me everything that you're thinking in the comment section below. Do you think it is potentially a positive that they are going to have a little bit more freedom with the generational titles to experiment, play around, and introduce new concepts that we didn't think possible for a traditional generational title, and that it makes sense that they're doing this so that they can have everything eternalized in Champions, so that when we do get new content, it will always be implemented over there as well? Or are you on the opposing side? You don't like them changing up the combat system or the idea of it at all. You want them to keep traditional combat in generational titles, and you want Legends EA to continue being the experimental titles, and you want it to be completely separate like that because that's what you know. Tell me everything that you guys are thinking in the comment section below, because you know for a fact that I'm always going to be down there with you guys. But with that, yes sir, it does appear to be skedaddle the clock, so I'm going to go ahead and do just that. I'd like to thank you guys ever so much for watching. I truly do hope you enjoyed. Doing the greatest favor of dropping a like and a comment, and consider subscribing for more content just like this here. And with that, I'm gone. So thanks again, hope you enjoyed, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. Do me the greatest favor, taking good ass care, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!